Today's video here is about how we can take what we've learned from my previous videos in places like uh, down there in the Philippines and elsewhere, and stop letting people play this game where they get to live anywhere they want and chop down all the trees and encroach into the swamp, but then not in my backyard mentality because they're established and special. So if they can ruin the swamp with their infinite ridiculous housing with no safety measures for actually preserving anything, then I think what we can actually do is come in here, and you could come in up here, you come in down in here, and you create your ocean canals through the areas that already have a river. So this ocean canal, in this case, it can get all the way up here to the corner of Texas, Texarkana, over here. And even with this narrow of a low valley, of a flood valley, you can create side channels with the ocean water in between other farms, like I said. And you can have infinite backed up seafood reserves all the way up to 300 feet. Now over here, you don't get to 300 feet until you get all the way to Metropolis City. You know, the Superman city. And here is where you would transition somewhere in here from a saltwater canal to climbing with this setup I have here. I'm going to be showing off climbing up to higher elevations slowly, so that this is actually a valid shipping canal idea. Now, let's get right to it, I guess. So we'll go over here to my design. This was originally for the Tehuantapec, whatever it's called, area, because you can't put a direct canal in there because it gets up to 600 or 700 feet. Even if you dig it down to 600 or 500, you're still up that high. So what I came up here with was, I originally described barges where you have train lines on the sides and middle of them. This graph's trying to show off everything at once. I don't know if it all work together or not, but here's my line of thinking as far as I can reach. So I described how you would have a gray chain. So if you have a mountain and you have these towers along here that are spinning the chain overall, and you have barges going up one way and down the other. Now, if you want to get really ambitious, like I was saying, and you don't want to offload the ocean liners because it takes too long in the modern era, then you would actually load the ships, like I was saying, into these grooves on the barges. So like in the case of down here, like I was saying, you would get your farming seafood canal up into this area at 200 to 300 feet. And then you get right to here, right? And you have a complete straight shot for leverage tug. And this has to go off this way, but that doesn't matter because the climbing point is just right here. So, like I described before, you'd have continuous escalation, like it's a ship escalator. So ships don't do very good not floating. So you would perfectly balance the floating was the concept here. So you've got your lower wet canal zones in this trough area. So big shipping cargo vessels have that long skinny point on the bottom. So this could be adjusted in here with some super basic strong crank points, you know, whatever, so the ship fits correctly along its line in here in berths. And then you have the ship's rear engines that can still be down in the water to provide thrust as the input is requested. And then now these water towers we have here, the concept is they become pressurized by the weight of the entire barge and ship, right? So you would have these tank treads. That is the red. You've got the overall upper tread area, and then it goes back down around. Now these are like floating, each tread piece instead of just a rubber mat. It's like a buoy, you know, floating pontoon, whatever you want to call it. So then it's however deep and can be like piston extended somewhat as it comes around to whatever degree is realistic. And these all along the length create like foot-pound pressure, whatever you want to call it, PSI, that keeps the whole thing floating, right? And then you have whatever amount of water in here that's trapped, so that each reservoir point you hit that's however what foot or a few inches higher, while like the water is trapped within the zone by the barge, so all the water isn't leaking down the mountain immediately. And then the weight of the climbing pressure is causing these towers of big water to inflate, or to inflate. That would be funny, like party balloons. That's funny. No, just increase pressure. And so if you wanted to further increase the pressure, you could have, you know, bladders of air in the tanks, of course, and make it even higher PSI. Whatever's most economical. So the concept is, even with the barges, however tall, you need support on the sides so that the ship doesn't wander and so it doesn't tip over anyways. Absolutely certain we don't want it to tip over. So we don't give it any room to tip over. The trains going along the sides would be, like I said, have big pieces directly sticking out on spring tethers along the ship. And then if you take a corner, then you'd have chain tension inside the train cars. So then chains connecting to each spot as the ship swings in around a corner. Then you'll have points where it's closer and farther from shore for that side. And in this way, you can keep the tension perfectly with big counterbalances in the trains from either side, right? Now, these trains can be. Here was something I thought of as a concept that I don't know if it's valid in this case, but somewhere in the world it might be. The concept that your barge could alternately be moving along before it gets to a mountain and it's like flat or whatever, probably be more realistic. And then you'd be picking up shipping containers with these big spin wheels on the side off of the trains as you're moving. And then you'd have shunt like conveyors that would slide the shipping containers on and fill up the whole kind of boat strategically as it's moving. And this would be good if you have a bunch of manufacturing goods that are coming in from wherever through to your river shipping lane, and you want everything to keep moving, so then your trains would be really expediting each shipping container onto the boat and keeping up with it at whatever speed and keeping it moving. I think it all worked together pretty functionally. Um, so you overall have your crank gear. I don't know if it would probably be horizontal. I don't know if it would be upright. Like I was originally thinking a giant upright wheel set into the mountain you carve through and make it all huge. Just as the main support point that's the very largest at the, highest point slightly. You don't want to make it so high above everything else that there's like downward tension too much on the lines where they connect to um, maneuvering the ships and whatever. So, let's see here. So, the other thing I was going to point out was the direct cogging of ships going down this way on, your downward descent, and then the ascent next to it. So, you can have this feature where the weight momentum of this ship going down, this barge with the ship on it, is pretty great. So, depending upon the weight on these ships and how many are going up and down, you can pretty much offset a lot of the, um, like, you don't want to overweigh the bigger system. The bigger cable that's coming through here is just like generally at whatever tension that's keeping everything flowing at all times. You never want it to stop ever once it gets going. You get everything moving and constantly shipping. Um, and in this way, it's just a support guide above on top of the towers. And then below are the gears of, regulation that are um, part of the belt zones of like additional support. So like the upper part of the hull of the ship, um, you'd have like the railing area or whatever right above or below it, and these gears would be utilizing like reinforced railings on the ships, or if that's not realistic, then below on the barges. Um, and then this gold belt here, there's this concept that what do you do if your shipping vessel is not quite as wide up top or has different proportions and whatever. So the concept would be this belt would be, you could change the size of it. Like, so instead of the tension needing to be like the length of it for a section of the canal needing to be altered based on the size, instead it'd be moved over. So like you'd have this system where when the cog swings around on one side, there'd be this secondary swing mechanisms for the arms that would make them stick farther out, so that they'd be swinging in based on the needs of the wider ship. And then on the other side, they'd put more pressure swinging out the other way, um, magnetically or somewhat gear oriented into magnetics. I'm not sure, but in this way, Let me just pop my whole spine. Okay. In this way, you can control the tension of the whole belt zone and keep it, you know, working and supporting like hammock style, but also, um, yeah, I don't know what else to say about that at the moment. Now you can have, like I said, um, you could have an enormous barge that would take up all the lines, and you could move enormous pieces of stuff. You could crank them all up if you need to move big enough stuff someday. But otherwise, it would fit in within the lanes most stuff of the big shipping vessels, general size. Okay, now what I was gonna point out was now different places that could utilize this design other than here and then directly above it right here. Look at that weird curvature going right up there. Okay, so there's all of these other connection canals that could make use of what I'm talking about here to shorten distances for shipping. I was gonna come in here though, so if you've got a shipping lane like one of that one or this one, this one's so low you might just carve it straight through, but you could still have the train assist and like unloading and loading quickly concept. What I was going to point out though is once you get up north here on one of these areas, you would employ this concept where the water towers, you'd actually be like bringing water from the ocean on each barge pushing in, and then it would be pressurized into the tanks along, so it'd be salt water in the tanks, and then those tanks can not freeze. You can use them later for desalinization if you want and filter back out with pressure. But up here, it's not all that useful because, of course, here there's infinite snow melt water all year round. So that's not really a necessity here. But I'm just saying that's a concept elsewhere for shipping areas. Like, if we point out one that makes sense with, would be like over in here. Let's see, where is it? Like this one. Moving stuff from sea level to what's dropped to below sea level over here. Imagine how much lusher everything would be if it was all intermixed with sea correctly, so that instead of taking away your fresh water by digging through here, you actually have it in its own channel canal next to your ocean canal. That's how a human body is supposed to work. A modern athletic body like mine, I have, what's known as a lymph system, and it's has more minerals in it, like the ocean. So that's how humans work, and that's how the globe we live on works. You need ocean desalinization through the farmlands near every coast. And there's a lot of low farmlands near the coast that people have been really, I'll say, squatting on and abusing because they don't ever make anything better. It just gets worse. So this is the era of making things better and making it so that there's more areas where things are shipped between zones, with less um, size of the order required. It can be, mass shipped. Um, Eventually, you get to this point where if you want a future that's green and you don't want to be burning a bunch of oil anymore because it's expensive or whatever, and so you would be using a whole lot of these canal lines, because when a ship's on the canal line, it's not using really any fuel, and the trains pulling it aren't really using any fuel. Everything's like as if it's empty because it's floating. Trains don't have to put in that much effort. Um, let's see here. Moldova. You could go all the way up to here. See, what's currently happening as I watched it happen was the Dust Bowl killed off a bunch of people, and everybody was pointlessly farming infinite land to feed animals and feel like they were authentically Native American or whatever around the world. And this mentality is so pervasive to waste all of your time feeding meat animals, using the whole world up. So then they realized that there wasn't actually enough populace to justify how many trees they were cutting down everywhere and replacing with animal farms. And a lot of the farms, so then they stopped doing animals as much and got that all locked down to even more horrible slaughterhouses in the 2000s. And instead, now all of these farms, you say, well, what are they doing with all of them? Why are they so full of chemicals? And so that it's not for human feed. It's not for animal food. It's for, yeah, biofuels. Ugh. Biofuels. Even though if you were going to do biofuels, like they pointed out recently in a video I was watching about Saudi Arabia, then they were using their, like, dirty water from their sewage and then running it and actually cleaning it with nature, really basically, and sending it down a canal, and then experimenting by planting various types of crops and seeing what kind of, not to feed anything, but to get, like, there's certain trees with fruits that they were showing off. Was it jujubes? I don't know. But you can get polymers and stuff from all kinds of things. Um, there's even some fruits and whatever else that you can get part of it and like get the part that's the tastiest and the best, most nutrition, and then take the rest and use it for manufacturing. Um, so the concept here is everybody's gonna have to learn to smell the coast. Like, it was the end of the effing world to the Republican murderers in Idaho when the landscape shifted and Idaho swung down lower, and they had a whole lying campaign about it where they wouldn't allow anybody to even discuss the concept that the entire northwest region here can flux so much that these valleys in here, especially Emmett Valley, at one point pulled down so low that it was below sea level all the way to the coast. That's how much things fluctuate. And then normally it's at like, when we first moved here, it was at like 1800 in here. And then it's kind of fluxed up and down, so that currently they say that Emmett's at 2350, higher than ever. Um, I don't know what the land's gonna do. Maybe it'll drop down lower again or not. Who really cares? But it's just it's taken so long for the retard public consciousness to catch up with the truth of the world they're living on. Like they just got indoctrinated into stupidity. Um, so we need to shut down all the people as hard as possible who are trying to throw their weight around, either with dialogue or physically, with restrictions, and who are trying to prevent um, the natural salt water like interaction with the inner continents. Like they admit that there's supposed to be salt water connection, pretty much. It's so low through here when the land's relaxed, all the way into Idaho and down the Snake River a ways into like all these bigger rivers in here, like um the Salmon River, the main one with its infinite branches that shift and change. Um there's like little river sharks and manta rays and stuff that come in from the ocean and adapted. And when everybody's done poisoning and freezing the land, then everything relaxes out so much that shipping becomes easier and easier. I remember a world just 20 years ago, 15, where Portland wasn't all twisted up here with the whole river curving in like that. It didn't do that. There was no hump there, and Portland was over here. It just was straight. That's the whole land's twisted, and you can't argue with me anymore because we're back in the version of Earth where everything's twisting. It's twisting here, it's twisting here. Everything's a twist. Um, Here's a twist, a twist, a twist. You can't deny it anymore. Everything's unspinning. All right, so here in Idaho, the thing I was going to point out was my design is so valid when you refine down how it all functions that right here by Warren, there's this place called Steamboat Summit. Now, the concept is if you have shipping lanes, like I'm describing, that go as far as possible, how far can you get into the local Idaho mountains? And I would assume here, because you can have a reservoir that fills up this valley length here, and then you can have a steamboat of whatever size, paddle wheel setup like I'm describing, creep up or around this way or this way and get to the summit. That's why it's always been called Steamboat Summit. And then it's kind of the high point for the whole mountain region where people could get their goods off of that area. I just think it's interesting because this whole design I'm describing is so practical that it could technically be employed not with big ships but with barges all the way back, who knows how many hundreds of years back. And it's the type of thing that you would think that would be done in certain areas of the world and historically. So, everything is named to support my shipping canals. Like they're ready for everything to start moving and for trade to, shift into more transport corridors. Because if you have trade all spread out, this amazing thing happens where the cities get smaller because other towns get slightly bigger. And then instead of having a continent where you have mega cities that are poisoning the land inevitably and creating, a stupor among its populace that they think they're nothing could matter. They don't have to do anything with their life. Everything just magically appears at the supermarket. So, that's kind of sinister when you think about it. The amount of auto enslavement they're putting on everyone else, like I've said. So, if there's a version of America, of the US, up into Canada, and even Mexico and everywhere else, spreading across the world, where you have every shipping area is 100,000 to a million people in different cities everywhere. And when you actually spread it out and have logical supplies to each area, and everybody starts thinking about their supply chains and where they're coming from more, instead of having it all mysterious, controlled by elitists, then prices go down, realistic things are grown and manufactured in different zones for what's actually needed instead of what government councils hope and think will be needed. There's no logic to any of it. So if you have a bunch of cities that are regular sized all over the place, that quickly adds up to billions of people so much faster than mega city population zones. Let's see here. What was the other thing I was gonna mention? If everything's being shipped in more areas, including up, like I showed, through this river canyon all the way up to, oh, it's here, Nahades. You could climb steadily up this area up to the height where the canal would then run all the way along the border I showed off before. You could keep it right around that height till you get all the way over here at 4,000 feet to this river everyone talks about, the Rio Grande. So then you'd have a shipping zone for this border, a shipping zone for this border, but it'd have to come down through Portland. That's why it's called that. Such a major port. The mountains are just too blocking up through here. Like it gets up to 2,000 feet, 2,500 in here. Out east of Seattle. So the shipping lane here, it's doable. Anything's doable. You could have it go up to 2,000 feet and back down over through this area. That's something that could happen in the future. It just seems like something that would keep being delayed and never end up happening for another 50 or 100 years, because people would just say, well, why not ship it through the Portland River up through the world's biggest future river, Columbia River? When the world untwists and there's the proper amount of snow, there's no bigger river in the world. Okay, then. Thanks for watching.